Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Thursday night, March 2nd, in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Well, for the past 3 years, this has been what the atmosphere has preferred to do. I'm actually showing you here the 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. So this is winds about a mile above our heads, and what we're going to focus in on is the trade winds. And if you look and stitch together 2020, 2021, and 2022, plus January of 2023, this is what we saw. Strong easterly wind bursts, westerly winds coming out of the Indian Ocean. And it was like that nearly every single forecast I've given you for a very long time. What that did was create a lot of rising motion here. So we spent a lot of time talking about the MJO in phase like 3, 4, 5, and occasionally 6. A lot of time spent right here with the MJO, giving us the best rising motion. And what those strong trade winds did was they created a lot of upwelling of colder water here along the equatorial Pacific and drove that warm water to the west. And at the same time, we got what's called the negative phase of the Indian Ocean dipole, and we also saw the negative phase of the Pacific decadal oscillation. That's the warm water you see here with the cooler water that surrounds it. So that's what these last 3 years have given us. And again, when we talk about El Nino, La Nina, what we're really referencing here is the behavior of those trade winds. Well, since that time, it's all let go. And the trade winds now, you can see, if I take you to Australia, I mean, they're now coming out of the west. And it's actually spun up several little tropical cyclones. There's one over the Northern Territory here in Australia, and some just north of New Zealand, 2 tropical systems. But no longer are these very strong trade winds ripping across the Pacific Ocean, and that's a sign that this La Nina has let go. In addition to that, to see the MJO going so very strongly into amplitude phase 8, while I still hold that this is not a true phase 8 MJO, in other words, all the convection in the Pacific Ocean, I actually think it's more related to those 2 tropical systems I showed you, plus this big, what we call Kelvin wave moving across right now. Doesn't matter. It's here, not spending a lot of time over in this area where it had been for so very long. And the ocean temperatures just continue to change. Now, earlier this week, I made a comment about these ocean temperatures, and I'd like to just reiterate that and talk about it for a second. Because we've now seen the Indian Ocean dipole go back to neutral. We are watching the ocean temperatures in the equatorial Pacific Niña region 3.4 continue to warm, and they're already very warm over here just off the west coast of South America. But I made a comment earlier this week about the colder water that we have in place right here, and the warmer water that's tucked between Hawaii and Alaska. We still have what's called the negative phase of the Pacific decadal oscillation. And that negative phase of the PDO does pose a risk for drought potential, especially in the plains of the United States. All right. So if this stays cold and this stays warm, but we've lost La Nina, that could still result in the possibility of the atmosphere losing a lot of its momentum in the middle of summer, building up into blocking ridges, and possibly giving us that triple ridge pattern with one here, likely one somewhere in this vicinity, and one out here in the open Atlantic. Now, where this is going to be, that's still, of course, yet to be determined, but the risk is on the table because of these warm waters. So what's most important in this forecast going forward, now that La Nina is coming off, is to pay attention to these waters here. Remember, these are all symptomatic of the behavior of the atmosphere. So what we're going to be watching here is just over the next 60 to 90 days if this pattern moderates, if it changes. Because if it does, that's an indicator that we could really see a substantial change in the upcoming summer forecast. So I want to remind you, because we're going to get brand new data on Sunday of this week, what the current long-range European model is doing. So this was its forecast for February, and it did very well predicting March. I mean, we're now in March, and this almost looks exactly like what I just showed you. What we see going into April, May, June, July, and August is that nearly every long-range model is trying to aggressively return, well, possibly El Nino by summer. And could it be too fast? Sure. I don't know yet. We've got to get into spring to really see, but it's certainly a robust signal. The other part of the signal is there's still warm water here. Now, that is a part of the negative phase of the PDO. The models have backed off on how cold it is in this particular area, though, and through here. And that's critical as well. And because of this, the ECMWF long-range forecasts for summer they're probably driest in the west and east of the Rocky Mountains. They're not showing strong precipitation anomalies right now. Now, we'll get new evidence of this on Sunday, so we'll talk about it early next week. But I just want to show you why I'm concerned about this. Why this warm water? What does it tell me? Because when you look at sub-seasonal to seasonal forecasts, there are very few variables that actually correlate to the weather patterns that you can use to that are statistically significant to use to make a forecast, and ocean temperatures are one of them. They're kind of like I said, they are kind of a symptom of the total atmosphere's behavior. So we can look at a time series of the PDO, and we've talked about it in previous videos. And what I want to show you is that really since about 1998, the beginning of 98 or maybe mid-year 98, we've seen far more negative PDO scenarios than anything. Now, when we had the El Nino event of 15-16, the PDO for a temporary amount of time did go positive. And it was also shortly positive in like 2002, 2003, 2004, a little area in through there. But for the most part, it's been negative. And if you look back from 1998 to present, this is actually what our precipitation pattern has largely looked like. Again, every one of those years, 98 to 2022, we have seen more drought in the plains, drought developing over the west, and even some drought in the southeast. That has been a common reoccurrence, I think largely due to that PDO signal. And it's quite common to be wet in this area. So that's what this ocean temperature pattern has meant to us in the last 3 years, and also going all the way back to when I graduated high school in 1998. So let's just keep that context in this forecast so that you understand why I'm going to watch this so carefully. Because we've taken one thing off the table, and that's La Nina. All right. Now from here, remember, we're still going to have this conversation, even though there is a tremendous amount of snow on the ground here. Getting that moisture into the soil is another thing. Now, I understand that the soil temperatures, we looked at this last week, they're not overly cold, which means we can get a lot of, especially in Minnesota, to melt and get into the soil. And there's a lot of heavy rain that's coming to this area that will eventually start to percolate down and start to cure what's left of this drought from last year. But the newest drought monitor released this morning, this is what it currently looks like. And I just want to take a look at a couple of things with the drought monitor, all right? First thing I'd like to do is let's go look at how about a change map? And I'd like to go back, not over the last week, although it's good to take a look at what's changed in the last week. I mean, look at these changes in California. But I'd like to look at a 2-month change map. So we're trying to identify where we've seen it getting worse. And you can find a few places in the Pacific Northwest, here in the southern and high plains, and under Florida's massive subtropical ridge, we've been getting drier here as well. The other thing I like to do with this is I like to come up and look at the time series just to get the latest data nationally on where we are. Because back in late October, November, and December, we had at one point reached about 86% covered in drought. That, by the way, is any form of drought. And we're currently, see if we can get to the very end here, about 57%. Actually, it should be lower than that, about 55% if I can hover it in the right spot. So we've seen this drought area come down, and we are going to see some changes in the flow of the jet stream, I think, that are going to continue to be favorable to eating away at drought. And I do believe coming up in this pattern, there are some better signals to eating away at the drought that's here. And we know we got snow on the ground here. So this is just quite important. Take a look. California, right into this area, out of drought. No longer in drought in that particular spot in California. Very important data just released by the U.S. Drought Monitor. Again, this is a product out of the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. Okay, this evening, the next storm system we've spent a lot of time talking about this week is now coming out into parts of Texas. And a couple of things to take note of. The severe weather is already rolling in this area. We've been keeping a close eye all week on Thursday night, tonight, and to early tomorrow morning in this particular part of the South. I do want you to see, though, that there is quite a bit of dust being blown on the backside of this, very strong winds in that particular area. Now, over the last 3 days, that system did add in parts of the Sierra Nevada, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of pictures of this on the news and social media, but some places it added another 3 feet of snow in the Sierra Nevada, and a lot of snow into parts of Arizona. In fact, have you seen some of the pictures of the snow in Tucson? If you haven't, go out and see them. They're amazing to see that. But more snow in the Colorado Basin, which is 120, almost 125% of normal snowpack right now. And again, we had that system that had the winter storm warning on it a couple days ago that rolled through parts of North and South Dakota and Minnesota, northern Wisconsin. And you can now see the snowfall totals that added up here. Remember, early in the week, we even got a little bit of snow in New York City. So that's our last 3 days. We do need to check in on the west again just to see what these numbers look like. A lot of places are sitting in this 170 to 230% range, and that extends across Nevada into Utah and here in the upper Colorado Basin. So these the amount of snow that's in this area is substantial right now, and in some places here there's over 70 inches of liquid in that snow. So we're not talking about how deep the snow is. There's 7 inches of liquid when it all gets melted down. All right. Now, right now, this evening, I'm just going to take you straight to the Storm Prediction Center's website. And one of the things I love about it is they have this great overlay. You can kind of show you all the different things and all the different hazards. So far today, we've had 95 reports of severe weather. And that, by the way, is just when I'm recording this. I just got home a little while ago from Kansas. It's about 9 o'clock in the evening. And we already had 6 tornado reports, 95 total reports. A lot of these storms throwing down hail. We have mesoscale discussions out for where the storms are going to go later this evening. And there are severe thunderstorm watches to the south and tornado watches here in eastern Texas, parts of Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. So this is an ongoing event tonight we're going to have to keep a very close eye on. If you're in this area watching, catch this video tonight, please stay weather aware, have your NOAA radios up and running with batteries, and just to understand that these storms are looking pretty nasty as they roll through this area. Now, tomorrow, we're going to watch the severe weather threat move over parts of Tennessee and Kentucky, and the Storm Prediction Center this afternoon upgraded this area to an enhanced risk. And in addition to all of this, the synoptic scale winds around the system tomorrow are very strong. So I just pulled this off around noon tomorrow when the low is going just north of Paducah. It's almost over Evansville here, and we've got very, very strong synoptic scale winds. And that's one of the reasons why we've got high wind advisories out for a huge section of the country tonight. This is all high wind warning in here, red flag warning on the backside. And don't forget, we're still watching more systems coming down the west coast and more coming in the next couple of weeks. So there's still a freeze warning in parts of the San Joaquin Valley. Winter storm warnings are out for the northern mountain ranges in California and the Sierra Nevada, and this extends kind of up the I-5 corridor toward the mountains and the Cascades. And we got more snow coming into New England. Now, what's been, as you heard me talk about a lot this week, quite maddening is where the snow is going to be on the northern side of this current system. And I'd like to go right to the high-res NAM. We're going to look at the 18Z run. We'll get this parked about where I'm recording. It's about here, 9 o'clock. And what we're going to watch is this storm system roll through parts of Arkansas in the overnight hours, go through Missouri into southern Illinois by 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. There's going to be a lot of very heavy rain out ahead of this, and storms again that are going to follow that front. We've already talked about the ones here tonight, but you're going to see tomorrow the risk of those storms coming through parts of southern Indiana, getting into Kentucky, Tennessee, and building on down a line like this. Now, the high-res NAM has got this all trying to be converted over to snow falling in this area. And you've watched all week. They've had the heavy snows as far back west as here. They at one point had them as far down south, cutting through Indiana, Ohio. And the current run is splitting the difference right into this area. And that low then pushes over the eastern Great Lakes and eventually into southern Ontario, where we're expecting some heavy snows, and then into New England. And this has been a maddening forecast in New England as well. At one point earlier this week, we were talking about this system on Saturday delivering snow down into New York City, Boston. It's now shifted north, and we're not seeing that. Just a completely different look here. And the winter storm warning is out for this system right here, coming in on Saturday into parts of California. That's just the next coastal low ripping through there, and you can continue to see more getting added here along the west coast. Now, I'm going to do the multi-model analysis, but I want you to understand that right now, this credit to this goes to Ryan Maui. I really appreciate him sharing with me these skill scores. The GFS has really fallen off. It was performing equally well. In fact, you remember the last couple model runs, I kept commenting how even though there were slight differences, maybe in the snow from this current system, but the models were putting the systems in the same place, the GFS just took a nosedive here in its skill score while the European has stayed quite high. So when we compare these two models, understand that the one on the left is not performing as well as the one on the right. This is the European. So we've already seen the high-res models with this system. Let's take a look at where these models now are putting down the snow tomorrow. So you can see the GFS is really stretching this from parts of, around Kankakee, maybe clipping Champaign, but coming up into northern Indiana, southern Michigan. The European model, much more stingy with that changeover here, but more snow into southern Michigan out of this. And then it pulls it into New England. And again, may start off with some snow in the overnight hours on Friday in and around like New York City and the rest of New England, plus heavy snows into southern Ontario. But it lifts and possibly switches over to rain after that. The GFS is your best model if you want snow here in the big cities in New England. It's trying to bring it farther to the south. But again, we notice that the GFS is not performing as well. Now, what happens as we go into Saturday and Sunday, there's another wave that moves out into the Montana, North and South Dakota, Minnesota area. And it's in both models here. So we're going to watch for that on Sunday. All right. And then as we play forward, another large coastal low is sitting off the west coast. High pressure's building in at this point behind that low right here. And that's also going to be the kind of the first ushering in of some pretty cold weather we're going to talk about. Now, what I'll be watching for is this. Now, take a look. Next Wednesday, this is still inside of a week from right now, the European models really wanted to put another system somewhere here in the Midwestern United States. The GFS is just overloading this whole area with much higher pressure, a 1052 high that shoves all the way down into Texas. So what do we end up getting? A cyclone showing up here, a big winter storm in the European next Wednesday and Thursday, and it's nowhere to be found in the GFS. And that's what some of these model differences are just out over a week. The GFS is also more aggressive on returning better flow into the West Coast, getting fully through the second week of the month. The the European has backed off on that a bit. So we've got a lot of things to compare here as we work through this forecast. Next, if we take a look at what is going on here with the 72-hour forecast of accumulating at least 2 inches of snow, notice where the models have got it here and then coming back into the northern plains. And then again, we're not going to use this for the west because these snowfall amounts will be huge. What a different scenario than we saw all week long. To show you the European model, let's see if we can blow that up one time there. This is where it has the snow accumulating. So if you notice, I'll just play this out one full week, which includes then the system that comes in over the weekend here and the following system. So you're looking at more snow in the plains. Parts of California possibly adding another 2+ feet. Sierra Nevada extending up into the Cascades, the same thing. But again, this path right in through here is where the latest European model's putting down snow. The GFS, the 18Z, is doing this. Okay, similar out west, similar snows here, but much different scenario for much of what we're seeing coming out of like Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and then getting into southern Ontario and New England. I just want you to see what the models are doing at this point. From here, I'd like to show you the total accumulated precip because we're very concerned about just how much rainfall is going to be hitting parts of the Mid-South out of these next few systems. So what we notice is that some of this might possibly get back into the plains. There are some model runs that have been bringing moisture back farther into Kansas and Oklahoma into week 2, but certainly here in the Mid-South, getting into like where the Ohio River and Mississippi come together and over the Tennessee Valley, very, very wet conditions are coming. Canadian Prairie is drier. Parts of the Southwest are drier. And the latest flow from the European models bringing a bit better flow here farther to the north along the West Coast. But let's look at it another way. This is the chance of getting an inch of liquid out of the atmosphere for the next 10 days. Let's go ahead and step this up to the probability of getting 2 inches of liquid, and might as well look at 4. So very wet conditions hitting this part of the Mid-South going forward. Now from here, remember, we're going to be watching out there once we're past like the 8th, 9th, and 10th for the Pacific jet to try to extend and go south. And that's what's really starting to push the flow into the West Coast. The latest European model backed off a bit on that, which is why now their week 2 precipitation anomalies are not nearly as strong as they were. But overall, that pattern is not a dry one for the United States. It keeps systems rolling through, and that's what we're going to see as we work our way toward the middle of this month. All right. Now, the GFS, like I told you, is more aggressive. It's trying to return more flow to the west, and it's got a wet anomaly here and for the Central Plains. That's why we have to watch this fully into week 2, that second week of March, to see if these systems are capable of getting flow coming far enough to the south that they curl out of Mexico with the subtropical jet and start to deliver the moisture back from the Gulf of Mexico. That's the top thing that I'm going to be watching here. From there, let's talk about the temperatures. And what I want to do is I just want to give you that broad view of what these temperatures are going to be doing. Because as we've seen in the models now for well over a week and a half, they've been advertising the push of this colder air into the Canadian Prairie, out into the plains, getting into the Midwest, getting into the South. And by the time we get into the middle of this month, we're going to be seeing that colder air established in the midsection of the United States. We're looking here at possibly seeing 10 to 15 degrees colder than normal for the middle of March. So this is going to be stifling, I think, for the folks. Maybe that was the wrong word, not stifling. It's going to slow down what's going to be happening here with early field work in the south, along the Delta, and into the southeast. This is just a lot of cold air coming in, and with it, we're going to see the risk of frost getting back down into this area. Now we have questions as to how long this is going to last. I'm going to take you back here a few slides and get into this. I really agree with the new European model outlook for the month of March. I think it's got it. I think there is better moisture return to the plains. It's going to be very wet in the Mid-South, Tennessee Valley, Ohio Valley. into the southeast, to the Carolinas, into New England. I see the drier risk in the Canadian prairie because the flow is too far to the south of it. But I also see that this makes sense that the West Coast is going to continue to stay wetter with this pattern. And if we look at their temperature outlook for that same time period, we get a very similar view here. Now, we need to ask how long the colder air is going to stay around. So if we do this kind of week by week and start off now with that kind of third and fourth week of March, we do see the models are coldest in the middle of the month and then start to back off on that cold as we approach the month of April. The model is going to have a hard time showing a pattern change as we get to the end of the month. And the reason why is they hang on to persistence and can't in the week 3 and 4 time period actually see the right kind of thing to cause a pattern shift. They just won't pick up on it. But it does right now wash out the colder anomalies once we get past the third week of the month, which means we could open up to a more mild April for a lot of people here in the central United States. Why the cold in the Midwest? The West and the Intermountain West? This is mainly, I think, a snow feedback issue in the model. So that's kind of the latest update I've got right now for you looking out longer term with the ECMWF. Now, what I want to do to finish this is I want to turn my attention to South America, because today's ECMWF run just continues to hit this corridor right in through here with very heavy rains. And we've seen in between those two arrows over the last 45 days, some places picking up approaching 800 to 1,000 millimeters of rainfall. So we're talking well in excess of 30 inches of rain, and we have a lot of crop that is not being harvested because of how wet the conditions are, and over the next 15 days, it stays wetter. The models are attempting next week to bring some more moisture into Argentina, but between now and then, temperatures are going to be quite warm in this area, and you can still see the driest spot right here between Cordoba, Santa Fe, and Buenos Aires. If we look at the temperatures, let's do a 10-day temperature anomaly forecast. We do see that most of the next 10 days are quite hot, 6 to 10 degrees Celsius above average in this area. It's going to continue to cause stresses there. The longer range model runs, though, want to return good rains to Mato Grosso, and that's where the safrinha crop is in and going right now, and so it's going to be important to see how this all plays out. Could be Mato Grosso carrying a lot of the southern states in Brazil with just better conditions farther to the north. And lastly, I just want to keep your attention on this. We talked about this throughout the winter, but over the last 30 to 40 days, we've seen parts of like the UK. We've now seen France, parts of Western Germany getting over to the Iberian Peninsula. This has been an area that's slowly been showing drier and drier conditions, while we've been quite wet in Eastern Europe. Getting here into Ukraine and this part of the Russian wheat belt, there's been a drier signal in places, but we want to watch this over here pretty carefully because we know the warmth we saw has got lower than normal snowpack in parts of the Alps, and that's important for spring stream flow. So I'll keep watching it, and we'll have another discussion about it soon. Appreciate your attention tonight. Have a good one. Thanks.